Greetings to the brothers. This is Waymon Brown, the creator of the EsquireProject.com, the #1 personal development blog for the self-enterprising black man. Be sure to check out the links in the description. As always, feel free to touch base with me, and I definitely appreciate your support in advance. As always, salute to the family. Now, this next topic is one that I think is very timely considering the time of year that we're in. This video is being released at the start of 2019. It's January 6th. This isn't really one that's going to focus on any sort of a New Year's resolution, not a New Year's resolution sort of a guy, as much as I believe in resolving to do something and just setting up new habits that you can carry out on an annualized basis to make your life better. But nonetheless, I do know that this is a time of year where people are speculating on goals that they want to hit. They're looking at things that they could have done a little bit better. And I have some information that I think is going to help the brothers in that regard, especially considering also the time that we're in when it comes to the state of black male media. A lot of the issues and concerns and areas of progress that we want to make as a collective, of course, they start with the individual. And it's very exciting to see where things will end up turning out over the next few years. So definitely want to show my appreciation for every man out there that is really trying to make an effort to invest into himself and to be a resourceful individual and to be a much better man on a daily basis. So keep up the good work and let's all move forward. This next topic is entitled Baseline Standards: The Black Man's Pathway to a Life of Personal Mastery. You know, as I look at my own experiences throughout life and as I consider the observations that I made of other black men at large, a lot of us have done ourselves a disservice in some major areas because we sold ourselves short in areas that could have boosted our overall quality of life. And I think a lot of us have done this basically just out of sheer negligence and not really being mindful of the power of employing simple, fundamental practices in a few major areas of life on a regular, consistent, committed basis. I'm a big believer in using principles and being conscious of key principles and combining them with a core belief that fuels your state of mind. And also, of course, we need action. So a simple habit that can be combined with those other two elements. And I think that that's basically the fundamental code to the combination lock that can serve as a game changer in any given area of our life. And what I'm referring to, of course, is by setting up baseline standards for ourselves. Baseline standards should be designed to protect us from harmful situations. They should provide us with dignity, and they should also serve as the catalyst for satisfactory quality of life in the respective areas that we're setting up our standards in. Baseline standards should also be sophisticated and powerful in that whatever standard that we set up, it should be reasonable enough to see the merit of establishing it, but also it shouldn't be burdensome to the extent that you question your ability to maintain it. Yet it should stretch you to go beyond where you are right now, and you should also see the compound benefits that will work in your favor by practicing your new standards. Basically, they should take you further away from what you don't want and get you a bit closer to what it is that you do want as well. Now, to me, one of the best ways to start turning things around and to start seeing improvements in life is to establish some baseline standards in areas in which you've been negligent, in areas that have bothered your conscience that you know you need to do better in, and just overall areas of life that you've been generally dissatisfied with and where you see a need for change because you recognize the damaging results that have taken place by basically living substandard in these areas. Another key thing I think is that your baseline standards have to be emotionalized, meaning that you associate some sort of pain or pleasure with your standards. In this case, I think it's important to associate a lot of discomfort with neglecting to live by the new standards that you're setting up for yourself, because you see the value in the prudence of living by them, and you should be able to find it unacceptable to do less than what you set out for yourself. And anytime that you are kind of getting off track, your standards should be designed to where you associate such displeasure with not abiding by them that you actually feel a bit guilty. This is where you can actually use guilt in your favor. And this is where you can use guilt to provide a dose of healthy pressure for you to make some needed changes. Another example would be what's considered eustress, not distress, but eustress, EU stress, which basically means when you're doing something that isn't necessarily difficult, but it isn't necessarily easy either. In other words, it's challenging, but it's also a beneficial challenge. And that's basically what we want our standards to be. We want them to benefit us. We want them to challenge us. We don't want them to present themselves as being too overbearing, and yet they shouldn't be so basic where we don't even see ourselves growing from them. So we want them to play a few different roles for us. Now, I think there's a lot of different areas in which we can all set up some baseline standards. But for this particular video, we're going to focus on three main areas, or three particular areas, I should say. And I think that these three areas are things that we can all get in control of, and they also lay the foundation for a life of personal mastery. And what I mean by personal mastery is that it's a life in which we can artfully control ourselves in any given area. And also where we have the belief and even the conviction that whatever is within our power, we actually can make happen for ourselves. So we're going to get into it. And I want to just touch on the three areas that we're going to focus on for this particular video. The first is going to be when it comes to managing our money. The second is going to be when it comes to maintaining a satisfactory level of physical fitness. And then the third is going to revolve around getting in control of our thoughts. So we've got three nice areas that we can touch on, and I'm sure all of us can identify with the need to see a change or an improvement in these areas, even if we've already been making efforts. So I'm going to start off with the first, which is managing our money. We can also look at it as being better when it comes to our personal finances. Now, let me start off by reading to you an excerpt from a book that a lot of you may have actually heard of, and to others this might be new, but nonetheless, the book is called Think and Grow Rich. Extremely popular book, Think and Grow Rich. It was written by Napoleon Hill at the early part of the 1900s and midway through the 1900s. I think his first book was published around 1925, if I'm not mistaken. And he published a number of different books throughout the 20s and the 30s, and also some beyond that. But one of his most popular is Think and Grow Rich. And without giving you too much into it, is basically a philosophy book on how one can attain riches throughout different areas of their life. And it's not just referring to monetary riches, it's also talking about things such as your health and peace of mind and your relationships with other people, etc. But there's one portion of this book in the chapter that's entitled The Six Ghosts of Fear. And it revolves around something that I think a lot of us can actually relate to and identify with. And I want to use this excerpt to set up this first area that we're going to cover. And also keep in mind, I think this book was written around like 1937. So some of the language and verbiage might be a little bit different from what we're used to these days. But nonetheless, of course, you'll be able to get the main point of what's being said. So let me just start off with this excerpt. It says, money is only clamshells or metal discs or scraps of paper, and there are treasures of the heart and soul which money cannot buy. But most people, being broke, are unable to keep this in mind and sustain their spirits. When a man is down and out on the street, unable to get any job at all, something happens to his spirit, which can be observed in the droop of his shoulders, the set of his hat, his walk, and his gaze. He cannot escape a feeling of inferiority among people. With regular employment, even though he knows they are definitely not his equals in character, intelligence, or ability. These people, even his friends, feel, on the other hand, a sense of superiority and regard him, perhaps unconsciously, as a casualty. He may borrow for a time, but not enough to carry on in his accustomed way. And he cannot continue to borrow very long. But borrowing in itself, when a man is borrowing nearly to or merely to live, is a depressing experience, and the money lacks the power of earned money to revive his spirits. Of course, none of this applies to bums or habitual ne'er-do-wells, but only to men of normal ambitions and self-respect. Women in the same predicament must be different. We somehow do not think of women at all in considering the down and outers. They are scarce in the breed lines. They rarely are seen begging on the streets, and they are not recognizable in crowds by the same plain signs which identify busted men. Of course, I do not mean the shuffling hags of the city streets who are the opposite number of the confirmed male bums. I mean reasonably young, decent, and intelligent women. There must be many of them, but their despair is not apparent because maybe they kill themselves. When a man is down and out, he has time on his hands for brooding. He may travel miles to see a man about a job and discover that the job is filled, or that it is one of those jobs with no base pay but only a commission on the sale of some useless knickknack which nobody would buy except out of pity. Turning that down, he finds himself back on the street with nowhere to go but just anywhere. So he walks and walks. He gazes in the store windows at luxuries which are not for him, and feels inferior and gives way to people who stop to look with an active interest. He wanders into the railroad station or puts himself down in the library to ease his legs and soak up a little heat. But that isn't looking for a job. So he gets going again. He may not know it, but his aimlessness would give him away even if the very lines of his figure did not. He may be well dressed in the clothes left over from the days when he had a steady job, but the clothes cannot disguise the droop. He sees thousands of other people, bookkeepers or clerks or chemists or wagon hands, busy at their work, and he envies them from the bottom of his soul. They have their independence, their self-respect, and manhood, and he simply cannot convince himself that he is a good man. Though he argue it out and arrive at a favorable verdict hour after hour. It is just money which makes this difference in him. With a little money, he will be himself again. Now, I thought that was important to share that excerpt because I recall being in a similar situation like this several years ago. I remember having a bank account with a negative balance and literally less than $1 to my name. Just thinking back on it, if I would have just had a crinkly $10 or $20 bill back then in my pocket, that would have literally changed my entire world. I remember walking down this trendy strip in Buffalo, New York, where I live, and seeing all the families out and about on a weekend afternoon, happy and smiling and buying food and drinks. And I looked like I fit right in because I had on some khakis and some dress shoes and a white button down, kind of business casual attire. But from the outside looking in was one thing, but just like the excerpt mentioned, what was going on in the inside was completely different because I was basically trying to keep a finger grip on my self-esteem at that point because I knew I had messed up. My lights and gas were turned off at the apartment that I was living in because I fell behind on bills, and I also have fell behind on rent and was extremely depressed. I remember I was looking at this gourmet pastry that I wanted inside of this bake shop, and I realized that I couldn't even afford it, even though it was less than $3. Now, how did this happen? Here it is at the time, I'm a grown man, had been working since I was a teenager. And granted, I fell back on some hard times and I had been looking for work. And I had actually made some investments into business without really all the way knowing what I was doing. And I was banking on those investments being fruitful. Basically, I put all my eggs in one basket. And once that fell through, I was hurting bad. But soon enough, I got back on my feet and I found work and I turned things around. But had I been a better manager of my money in the first place, I would have likely avoided such a situation, whether I was in between jobs or not. But you know what the tipping point for me was? I actually went to the Social Security website. And as long as you're on the books, you can check yours out too. But I looked at my total earnings over the years from the time I had been a taxpayer. And they actually have a database of how much money you earn since you've been on the books. And I was so disgusted with myself because I realized that I was in this situation due to simply poor saving habits. Because there was no money that out of all that money, or no reason rather, I should say, that out of all that money that I had made, that I didn't even have 1%, not even 0.5% of all that money in any sort of equity or liquid cash at all. And then I started to think about all those different times that I went out to dinner over the years and all the money I had spent on entertainment. $20 here, $50 there, $100-something there. And then I just considered my living expenses, which really hadn't been much. And I concluded that poor money management is what put me here. Yes, if I would have earned some more money, that would have helped as well. Perhaps. But really, the habit of not managing what I did have would have helped me even more if I would have actually done that. And I'm sure all of us, we hear the stories about people who even have millions of dollars. They go from being dead broke to earning multiple seven figures in the course of a year, and they still screw it up. So it's not really about the amount. It's about how you handle what you have. So shortly after this occurrence, I remember I made a decision that I was going to put myself on the pathway to a reasonable and attainable degree of financial security as a baseline standard. And I concluded that in principle, I should always have the means to take care of my basic needs, my basic survival needs, independent of anyone else, as long as I'm an able-bodied man of sound mind and I have earning ability to keep up with the cost of living. So my core belief became that sustaining myself financially would allow me to essentially manage most situations that I would encounter in life. Now, we're not saying money is a cure-all for everything, but typically most situations, if I can make sure I'm eating and I got a roof over my head, clothes on my back, that actually gives me the clarity to sort things out, to figure out ways to handle other situations. So I developed a habit. And my simple habit was to save at an absolute minimum at least 10% of all of my net earnings, meaning that after taxes, I would save at least 10% of my money. And if it was business related, after expenses, at least 10%. At a minimum, $1 out of every 10 goes towards my rainy day fund. In the event that I'm, again, going through some sort of a rough time, at least I'll know that I'll have some sort of a nest egg of savings. And the goal was really for me to at least have some sort of a buffer of at least 6 months or more so that I can sustain myself. And another minor practice to employ to support that sort of an effort could be to cut some costs on things like buying lunch throughout the week. If you work, let's say, a 9 to 5, and you really calculate how much money you spend, sometimes, some fast food, $3, $4, $5 here or $10 there. Over the course of a month, a lot of times, that might be a car note for a lot of people. So just being more mindful of the financial drain in and of itself goes a long way towards dramatically increasing one's savings goals. Now, after I mastered 10%, and I did master it, then I increased my percentage. And now I look forward, as of this recording, to actually be able to comfortably save roughly half of my earnings, where I can easily, without any question whatsoever, take half my money and put it away for myself. Now, at that point, I'm not necessarily just putting it all in savings, just like now all of my money doesn't strictly go towards a savings account, but to diversify myself, which I already have started to do, and I've already been doing that. But nonetheless, whether we're talking between retirement account, other sort of savings, other sorts of financial instruments and investments, businesses, etc., the whole point is that I know I plan on getting to a point where I can comfortably take half of my money and stash it and not have to worry about it, or put it into something and not have to worry about it immediately. So this isn't a financial literacy section that we're going over here. I'm simply giving brothers some basic things that they can do, some basic things that the average everyday working brother out there can do, just to stay a few steps ahead of making sure that his money ain't funny. Because we know how it is as black men. When your money funny, it's like your whole world is messed up. Money doesn't make you or anything like that. However, money is very important for a man. It's extremely important for a man to be able to maintain and take care of himself, and not just to survive, but eventually get to a point where he can be very satisfied and comfortable, and eventually to be able to thrive financially as well. Doesn't mean you have to be an overtly materialistic person or anything like that, but it's never good for a man to be struggling financially. So what's a baseline standard that you can have for your own self? What's one that you can set? Well, if you can, I'm going to encourage you, as a rule of thumb, keep at least $1 out of every 10 that you bring home to yourself that can go untouched unless absolutely necessary. Now, the second area is in the way of physical fitness. Now, I've been very fortunate to be able to maintain a very lean frame. However, even as a slim guy, having a healthy weight is one thing, but being in shape is definitely another. And while I haven't had any really severe health issues over the years around not being physically fit, I've definitely had some moments where I've had a few reminders to place emphasis on having good cardiovascular health and strength. Have you ever taken off running and you forgot that you weren't in high school anymore? You got a sudden reminder because you were, after maybe about 30, 45 seconds, kind of bent over, gasping for air, like, oh man, I didn't know I was like this. Or what about when you thought you still had it and you say, okay, let me go ahead and knock out this set of push-ups, 20, here we go. And then after the fifth or sixth, arms shaking, you struggling, shoulders about to give out. Men definitely need to stay physically fit, to stay healthy, and to stay in good, decent shape. We need to take care of ourselves and to have sustained levels of energy, in addition to having a satisfactory aesthetic that we are pleased with. Now, what's a rule of thumb to actually know if you have a pleasing aesthetic to your own self? Here's a hint. How comfortable are you walking around with a shirt, or walking around with no shirt rather, in the summertime? How comfortable would you be walking outside in public, no shirt, in the summer? That pretty much tells you all you need to know right there. But it's not just about body, it's also about health and about strength as well. And as a baseline standard, there should be a minimal level of fitness that each of us aspires to maintain. Now, for me, it's being able to jog at a moderate pace without stopping for at least 45 minutes. The reason is that I associate a healthy set of lungs and a strong heart with a sustained level of cardiovascular fitness. Now, walking very long distances is another way to stay in good shape when it comes to your cardiovascular health. In fact, walking is typically agreed upon by most individuals that specialize in health and fitness as being one of the best ways to stay physically fit. That's always been easy for me, though. I could walk for hours without stopping. I've trained myself to do it over decades. But my fitness baseline standard, as far as my own goal that I always want to maintain, is to be able to keep a moderate jog, basically at a moderate pace without stopping for about 45 minutes. And unless I'm really sick, severely sick, like I've got the flu or something like that, which is very rare for me to even be sick, there's really no reason in my mind to be able to not perform that sort of a task. A lot of times when I look at people and I observe their general state of general fitness, I think about how many of them would be able to survive if there was some sort of a state of emergency and they had to put on a pair of shoes, or put on a pair of sneakers rather, and just walk a very long distance. Say if it was maybe 4 or 5 miles. How many would actually be able to do that in this country, in the United States? A lot of people are severely obese, but even those who are not, who are in a healthy weight range, even they would actually find that to be a struggle because they're not actually in shape. So a lot of times I think about the necessity for me to be able to jog for a long distance because it'll help me to definitely know that overall my health is there, or overall my fitness is there rather, where I'm capable to perform at a certain level of functional fitness. And that's very important to me. And it's also very rejuvenating to be able to work up a sweat. Now, in addition to this, I find that strength training is important to me as well. But I'm not trying to necessarily look like Terry Crews. And shout out to Terry Crews because that dude is in incredible physical shape. But I know that it's more important for me to feel confident in my full body strength. So my commitment and my baseline standard is to doing at least one full body workout every single week where I can work all the major muscle groups with adequate reps to push them to grow and to have more endurance. So I want to definitely make sure I can jog for a moderate pace. That's the standard. And also my habit to help me within that standard is to be able to do a full body workout to keep my muscles nice and strong and toned. And while I'm doing that workout, of course, I'm including cardiovascular exercise as well, usually before I start with the weight training and or afterward as well. Now, while it's nice to be able to say that I can go to the gym 4 or 5 times a week and I get it in, that's not really my goal. And neither is that something that, as of right now, that I really need to keep pace with because my lifestyle doesn't really call for that. But to know that I'm dedicating at least one day minimum out of every week to do high rep, moderate weight to heavy weights, working every single muscle group, beating the hell out of my body, so to speak, once a week, giving myself a good physical challenge that you stressed that we mentioned earlier. Not easy, but not necessarily the most strenuous, but something that is definitely worthwhile and challenging. To me, that's a baseline standard to maintain. And some of the benefits that I get from that, for one thing, of course, being fit helps me to feel more confident because I know that I'm strong. I know my clothes look better when I work out. And I feel capable of undertaking a variety of different types of physical workloads. My energy stays up, and my core belief is that as long as I take care of my body, then my body will take care of me. And the guiding principle when it comes to whether it be my jogging or whether it be working out with weights or doing body weight exercises is that basically the reference that I use is that I should be preparing my body to be in training for war. So when I work out, even if it is only once a week, that one time each week I give it all that I've got and I train like a warrior for that one day out the week. This is why I set one day a week as a baseline standard, because I know that throughout the week I can be preparing myself for the big day. I can prepare myself, I can get my mind in order, I can make sure I'm eating right throughout the week, and I can also make sure that I give my body enough time to rest and to recover throughout the week as well. And to assist me in that regard, just as some general rules of thumb, something as simple as limiting my sweets and other types of junk food throughout the week helps me a long way in that regard. Increasing my water intake and making sure I have enough fresh fruits and vegetables and quality proteins and carbs can also go a long way. And if you struggle with diet when it comes to just maybe taking in too much of the stuff that you don't need, here's a simple rule of thumb, especially when it comes to like sweets and junk food. If this has been a habit for yours, like it has for mine for the longest, I've been like a sweet fanatic for as long as I can remember. I, have typically just been eating way too much junk food. It's almost like a miracle that I'm not a person who has some sort of serious health problems for real. But if you can just look at what you normally take in throughout the course of a week, just cut it in half and then replace that with other things that are more nutritious, like an orange or bananas, pineapples, etc. Just doing that alone is enough to see some beneficial results for a very long time. So, what physical fitness baseline standard have you already set for yourself? Or can you set for yourself if you haven't really as of yet? What's your baseline standard for your physique when you look at yourself in the mirror? I know that this is a time of year where a lot of people, they do like the gym membership where they get on 3 months. Like where I live at, a lot of gyms are like 3 months for $99 or just over $100, $120 or something like that to let people kind of test it out. And I know I've done that a few times in the past. And, after about 5 or 6 weeks of going higher every other day, it's like the last 45 days I'm not even using the membership. And then, the next thing is I'll just wait till the summertime comes and then I go outside and play basketball or whatever and stay in shape. And then, you might do that a little bit, but then not consistently. And even still, you don't really have access to the equipment that you would want to really have if you were in a gym. And before you know it, the rest of the years went by and, aside from when you had that membership, you probably haven't gotten down and done 20 sit-ups or crunches or anything. So I would tell you, as a good rule of thumb, just like we had with our financial plan of saving our 10%, deciding to devote rather at least one day a week towards your body and your cardiovascular health, it'll definitely serve you a long way. And the third area to establish a baseline standard is going to be when it comes to emotional control through leveraging our thoughts. I think about how over the course of years, I developed a very disempowering habit of letting my thoughts get the best of me by focusing on things from the past that I wish that I could have handled differently. Where I would actually constantly replay extremely frustrating and disappointing experiences to the point that the thoughts would actually interrupt my entire day, sometimes for days at a time because I'll be harping on things that have taken place several years ago sometimes, but that I still find haunting. And that's a terrible habit, and I hope that you never form it, and if you already have formed it, then you know exactly what I'm talking about. And in these moments, I would always notice that my body would feel tense, and this is still something that I have to beat. And at the highest point of this habit, I would always, or not always, but frequently look and feel very angry and look very distracted. And it was because I was distracted. But this emotional state would completely interrupt my productivity and it would throw me off my game of whatever it is that I was trying to accomplish. Because in my head, I was actually trying to fix the past through confronting memories and altering their outcomes. And I remember watching this movie called Buried. And I would encourage you brothers out there to check it out. It was a very moving film. It actually focused on one main character throughout the entire movie. You only saw one person in the movie the whole time. And the main character was an American guy. He was working as a truck driver in Iraq, and he got kidnapped. And he was buried alive and held for ransom in the middle of the desert. So when he woke up, he was in this coffin, and he realized his plight. And of course, to say the least, you can't put into words how petrified and how panicked he was, and undoubtedly how hopeless he must have felt. And yet at the same time, this character was resilient throughout the movie. There was a range of emotions that most people probably never experience during this traumatic event. And the only thing that he had in this coffin was a cell phone and a lighter. And the lighter allowed him to look around the coffin that he was in, and the cell phone was his only communication device to try to get someone from the American government on the line to rescue him as he was in this unidentified location in the middle of nowhere, Iraq. Now, I won't tell you how the movie ended, but I'll definitely say that I would encourage you to check it out. It's definitely a movie that's well worth watching. Lots of lessons that I extracted from that movie. And as I watched the movie, as I mentioned, I was really touched by it because the director did a very good job of capturing the despair of the character's situation. The reason that I mentioned this movie is because I thought about it and I said, well, what if I were in a similar situation? This would have to be one of the worst predicaments for any person to be in. But I thought about the type of emotional control that I would have to exercise in a situation like this. To barely be able to move in a tight box with oxygen running low, not knowing where you are, a dying cell phone in a race against the clock to contact someone, anyone, to help you raise $5 million, or it's your life. It's something of all the sources around us that we can extract lessons from and references from. And for me, when it came to leveraging more emotional control, it was actually this movie that helped me in that regard. And I thought about how I formed this terrible habit of letting my thoughts escape me and get the best of me, and practicing this unintentionally over years. And I thought and I said, what real excuse do I have in exercising limited emotional control over things that I can no longer control? Things that I'm not even being actively confronted with. What reason do I have to let those things completely get me off course? What reason is there for me to allow things that are from my past to dictate my present state? I want to share with you a quote from a Stoic philosopher of the old days. His name was Seneca. He says, wild animals run from the dangers they can actually see. and once they have escaped, they worry no more. We, however, are tormented alike by what is past and what is to come. A number of our blessings do us harm, for memory brings back the agony of fear, while foresight brings it on prematurely. No one confines his unhappiness to the present. Now, to achieve a state in which I control my entire range of emotions, to always work in my favor, to always feel empowered, for me would be a lifetime achievement. To have complete control over my experiences in life and to not let anything ever disempower me. And I sincerely believe that one who achieves such a spiritual estate of possessing total peace of mind and having absolute faith in themselves is someone who walks as a god among men. I don't think that they can be viewed as just an ordinary person any longer. A god, of course, subject to the creator, but nonetheless, they've reached a level of superiority among the populace. Now, my baseline standard when it comes to this area is actually a work in progress, and that is to begin with controlling my thoughts by controlling my breathing consciously. I've heard it mentioned in Eastern philosophy that to control the breath is to control one's life. Controlling my breathing sets me on the path to focus and to concentrate on what I'm doing. Think about your own self. Think about the way that you breathe when you're upset versus when you're relaxed. How you might breathe after a heated discussion with a person or after dwelling on something that was unfavorable versus perhaps the way you breathe as you're about to fall into a slumber or when you first wake up. Typically, when you're relaxed, the breaths are slower, they're deeper, when your mind is in a state of relative peace. And remember when we talked about how baseline standards should neither be easy nor hard, but rather they should be a challenge. Well, developing the habit of controlling one's breathing consciously is neither difficult nor is it necessarily easy, but it takes a regular conscientiousness about one's emotional state and to decide to regulate the breath and thus regulate the thoughts and the feelings and thus the behaviors. And of course, the outcomes. Self-mastery. My brothers, I do hope that you found value in this video as all of the material that I release, and I just want to acknowledge everyone in Black male media spaces who are making content for us and who take the time out to do this, because I do think that it is a labor of love, even for individuals who monetize it, to be able to focus on how to help brothers and to see a need that needs to be addressed is definitely something that I think should be commended. So eventually I actually have even thought about the possibility of perhaps doing like an acknowledgement video of a lot of the YouTube creators specifically that are out there. And that might be something down the line to come, but just wanted to express my gratitude for everybody else that's out there creating content, and of course for you for listening, because you are also a big motivator for us to share our thoughts with. So until next time, brothers, peace and love. And keep your mind strong, your heart in check, and may wisdom be with you.